In this video, we will be learning how to unit test in Java. So we will start with a very simple example of unit testing with a simple calculator class, and then we will graduate towards using unit testing in a Spring Boot project. So we will learn a lot of different things. We'll learn how to use Mockito, we'll learn how to use JUnit, how to use different annotations, how to use arranged act assert pattern in testing. So let's get started. Here we have a simple example of a calculator class. We have a couple of methods here. So we have a very simple method of adding two numbers and subtracting two numbers. And then we have a main class, and in the main class, we are calling those methods and printing out the results. And then for these methods, we'll talk about like how to create a unit test. So there are multiple ways you can create unit tests. One is manual, which is in IntelliJ, you create a test folder, and then you under Java folder, you can create a subclass, and that's where you can write your unit test. Or there are options to do it automatically in IntelliJ as well. So for that, what you do is just right click. So when you right click, it gives you options to generate tests. So when you generate tests, so this will let you generate tests, and then you can write those tests. So let's see what we have got here. We've got the test here. So first of all, we start with defining the package where this test example is residing, and then we are importing JUnit annotations here. And before we proceed further in this class, let's see what do we have in the dependencies. So in the dependencies for testing with JUnit, we need to have a JUnit in the dependencies. So if you look at the dependencies here, we have two dependencies here, JUnit Jupyter API and JUnit Jupyter Engine. Both of them have this version, which we have defined in earlier in the properties. So in the properties, if you look here in line 25, you see we're using 5.10. So once the first step here is to add these in the dependencies. So you add the dependency, and then you can start using them in your calculator test class. So for the code that we are going over in the Spring Boot project will be shared in the description of this video. And if you want us to share this too, let us know, and we'll be happy to share this code as well. So once you have added these in your pom.xml file, next thing you need to do is go here and get started. So here we import the dependencies, and then we define the test class. So if you automatically created with IntelliJ, you would have the skeleton of the class, the method signatures, and you just have to fill the method body with the logic. So here we are declaring a calculator object, which will be used in different methods that we have. Remember, we had the sum and subtract method. So we'll see how we can use unit testing there. So first thing that you need to do when using unit testing in your class is you need to do the setup. That's when you arrange the elements that are required to make it happen. So it could be that you instantiate the object. So here we are instantiating the calculator object, or if you are using dependency injection, then you can use that as well. But here we are instantiating the calculator object, and so that's why we've used the before each annotation. So before each annotation basically is telling what are the things that you need to do before the test. So that's the setup. So that's why we have the setup method here, which is only instantiating the calculator object. Okay, now that first step is complete, and before each and the setup, arranging the setup is done, now we can get to the test. And for that, you have to annotate the method with add test. So add test is a method level annotation that is telling it that this is the method for testing. So this is the method for testing, and we've named it sum. You can name it anything, but it has to be descriptive and it should tell what the purpose is. All right, so in this case, we just wrote it sum, and we are using something called here assert equals. So these are assertions. So you can use assertions in this way where if we are, for example, adding two numbers, you can say assert equals, and then here we have given the number 5, like if the calculator sum method is used on 2 and 3, the expected result should be 5. So you give it a few arguments here. One is the whatever value you want to see, and then what the method you want to use, and then the message. So this will be testing, and you can use it for negative numbers as well, and we can use it here for adding one negative and one positive number as well. Now, when you are writing unit tests, so we first instantiated calculator object, right? So then we use its sum. That's where it's coming from. And then we apply the method on these values, and here we are asserting that this should be equal to this. If it is, the method will run fine. If not, it will give you the error message or the result telling you what the issue with it is. Similarly, for subtraction, we also created logic to deal with it. So we have assert equals 1 if the calculator subtraction method is used with the values 3 and 2. And we also have it for negative numbers and one negative and one positive number. And we want to check that the main method will also execute without throwing any exceptions. And here we are using another assert here, which is the assert does not throw. And in that one, we are using a lambda. And this will let us know if main method should execute without throwing any exceptions around. So to run these, if you have the dependencies on your pom.xml and you have done these imports properly, you should be able to see the option to run the test. So basically, you can run all the tests in the class, or you can run individual methods. If I just run this individual method, I see options here. So run sum or with coverage. So with coverage is it will give you the percentage of the code covered. Let me just run the basic one. So it ran successfully. Here it's giving me the result at the bottom. Test passed, and it's also giving the time it took to run. So now we, if we change the logic, let's say we go there in the sum and change the plus to multiplication, and then we come back to calculator test and run the sum test method. Let's see what happens. So now it is giving the message that assertion failed, error has happened, and what was the expected value and what is the actual value. So this helps us to deal with any issues which can happen on code basis, on which a lot of changes are happening. So let's say you develop the code and then you're doing changes on it. So if you have some kind of unit tests in place, they will help to determine if there are any issues down the lane, or if there are any code changes which can impact the code. So they will help you to catch those bugs. So unit test is testing the unit of the code, is testing, you're isolating some logic and testing it. So it helps you check if there is any issue with that logic in particular. So that was it with this example, basic example of calculator. Now we are going to uh, a different example of unit testing in a Spring Boot project using some of the knowledge that we have just learned here. All right, now let's look at how to use unit testing in a Spring Boot project. Here we have a Spring Boot project, which is kind of like ride sharing app. And the complete explanation of the code is in another video. In this video, we are just gonna go over how to do unit testing. So in this application, we have multiple microservices which are talking to each other by doing service registry. So we have drivers uh, microservice, we have the ride share or ride service microservice, and we have the Eureka server, which is the service registry. So driver service and the rider service, both of them are registered with Eureka server as a microservice, and they are interacting with each other. So both of them first send a request to Eureka server, and then Eureka server checks it if the other server is present, and then sends a response back. So one of the classes that we have in driver service, it's the service layer. And in the service layer, we have the driver service class. So in this class, we have the business logic, because it's a service layer. So we have the dependency using auto wiring. We inject the dependency of driver repository, which interacts with the database. And then we have some methods here, which include finding by ID, and we have a method to get the driver status, and updating the driver status and adding the driver. So for this driver service class here, we are going to create a test class. So looking again at these methods, so we have the get driver status method here. So it's basically using the ID, it is fetching the status of the driver. And if the driver is not found, it throws an exception. And we have an update driver status, which takes the status and the ID, and then it fetches based on the ID. It gets the status and sets the status, whichever the status of the driver could be available, busy. So let's say if it's busy, it will set the status as busy or available. And then it would save it using the driver repositories save method. The updated driver object will be saved with the update driver status method. And then we have the add driver. So add driver is basically just saving the driver object. So it's a very small class with these few methods, and using the manual method where you can just create the test classes in the test folder. You can create the test class, or you can generate them by right clicking on in the class and generating the test. So we have generated them already, and we start with few imports. So we are importing the driver service not found exception, where since it has to throw an exception if the driver was not found. We are importing the model, we are importing the repository, and then we are importing the JUnit uh, API, Jupyter API before each annotation, test annotation, inject mocks annotation. So we have a bunch of imports here. So here we are going to use Mockito and its annotations to mock the absence of an actual class. So instead of using the actual repository object, we are going to use the mock of repository object. And this will help us to avoid an actual database call. So if we look at the pom.xml for this driver microservice, we have the dependencies for JUnit there as well. And here we also are importing the assert equals to check the assertions, and we've imported Mockito as well. So to start with the first annotation we have here is the mock at mock annotation. So what is that doing? So at mock annotation is basically mocking the driver repository. So you don't have to use the actual driver repository object. You can use a mock object. That's what Mockito is providing you here. And then there you have the add inject mock. So that is basically telling you where the mock object of driver repository is being injected into. So which class is being used here? So that's what it's telling us, that we are injecting the mock into a driver service. And then we have the setup. So for the setup, we have the annotation before each. So before each, we are initializing those mocked objects we talked about earlier. And then we have the add test annotation to tell us that these are test methods. So we have these descriptive names, which tell you basically what the test is for. So this is to test the driver status when driver exists. So we have one to do that, and we have another method to test the get driver status when driver does not exist. So we will, in both of them, we will be using arrange, act, assert pattern. And what is arrange, act, assert pattern? So in arrange, we are arranging and setting up the mock behavior. So here we can set up an instance, and then we can, using the set ID, we have set the ID and status for the driver. And then we check that if we find the driver by this ID, then if the object is returned with the optional wrapper. Right, so that is what we arrange. And then act is when you actually call the method. So here we are calling the method. So the driver service has the get driver service status method. So that's what we are calling here. So let's go back to driver status and see where this method, here it is on line 44. So this is the one we are calling here. So we, as you see, we mocked and we use add inject mocks to get the driver service, and now we are getting its get driver status method with the value of 123. And assert is where we are verifying the result. So we are saying that the status should be available. And then we have using verify as well. What verify does is basically it checks if how many times it has this times, like how many times this call is run when we are finding by 123. So that we want to check it as well, like if it's run once, if it's run multiple times. So the first method is to test the get driver status when the driver exists. But what if the driver does not exist? So there's another method for that, and we've made the method descriptive. So the first thing, again, we've got arrange, act, and assert here. So first we are arranging uh, things, and we are using a value if the driver is not in the database. So we are using a value of 999, which does not exist. And so if it does not exist, then we want an optional to be returned, an empty object. And then we have an act and assert here where we are actually calling the method. And if the driver is not present, then we want an exception to be thrown. So that's what we are verifying. And then we are saying that in line 56 here that as this should be the method thrown. That driver with this ID was not found. And then we have verify for it here as well. Now that you've seen these, there are different ways to run it. As I showed earlier, you can go to the class and run it. So let's run it. So this is gonna run all the methods, and both of them have passed. All right, so this was how you use unit testing and regular Java code, and also in Spring Boot. If you have any other questions about how to use it, let us. Happy testing. Until next time.